If everyone could take a seat, we'll get started right away. Robert, let me take that for you. Folks, we're thrilled once again to have Dean Robert Willis, the Dean Emeritus of Canterbury Cathedral, as our speaker this morning, talking about saints and joy. And I thank you for coming out, and we're so excited to hear Robert's message for us.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. I'm seeing if I can see a clock, and I can, so I shan't keep you beyond midday. It's really good to be here, except for one thing, and Fletcher and I feel exactly the same about this. We're really sad to be going. It's been a wonderful week to be here with you, and you've given us a really good time. We've got to know so many of you very well, and we discovered that the trick of doing that was to go and take our morning coffee or our afternoon tea in the upstairs room of the bookshop, Dogwood, and people would come. And some of them had no idea who we were, but very often they'd ask where to find a particular book, which would start a great conversation. And after that, we found we got to know a number of people who were nothing to do with Christ Church at Greenwich, but we hope they will be from now on, because we actually feel that this is a vibrant and growing church in a massive way. So this is really a swan song, but at the same time, a real vote of thanks for you from both of us. The saints and joy is what I'm being asked to just reflect on a bit, and we can have some questions afterwards. Yesterday at the men's group, the men's breakfast, when we were talking to them, many questions came back about joy in everyday life. That was our topic yesterday. And I was trying to say that, and this I very firmly believe, that when you are being creative in a way that is particular to your own gifts, you are never nearer to God the Creator than then. And I've found so often in the past that when people have discovered a particular gift, it might be in making a relationship, or it might be in building something intricate. Where I've seen people build great sailing boats and goodness knows what in their drawing room and just get enormous pleasure from it. And at the same time, that has caused them to have interests and talk to other folk in a completely different way. I think creativity is one of the great gifts of God to each of us, but it will be as different as everyone sitting in the church this morning was, different kinds of gifts. When we go to the saints, well, of course, we're in the same kind of realm, because the saints of God are so many, many, many more than those pictured on your service order this morning on the front. I was looking at some of them as you took communion, and they are all absolutely different from each other. And all of us, I think, have different saints who help us through life at particular times. I think that talking about the way in which the light shines through all your beautiful glass is one thing of God's life, is there in the sun and the creation of each new day. But actually those pictures also tell the story of the character of the particular saints. I was looking at evangelists in the choir this morning when I was listening to the beautiful music. And those four evangelists are completely different in the character of the way that they tell the gospel story. It's quite clear that the Gospels were written after many of the epistles. So the letter to the Thessalonians, the first letter to the Thessalonians, is reckoned to be the very first piece of the New Testament that was written down. And it was written by Paul when he was actually missing the Christians in Thessalonica. And he wrote, as he did to all his churches, to the saints at Thessalonica. And I would want to stress, therefore, that if you think of sainthood as nothing to do with you, well, you're on the wrong path. Because the moment you are connected with a Christian community, you're called to be saints. And that's nothing too over-godly or too pious or anything at all like that. It's actually you're called to be the person God wanted you to be and to exercise all those, what shall we say, faculties and gifts that are latent inside you and might not flower until a later part of your life. But nevertheless, when that happens, you have a certain joy of creativity, and that can really rejuvenate in a special way. So that the glass here is not only showing you God's light in a wonderful way, it's also pointing to the absolute variety of human gifts that have caused that great train of saints throughout the centuries to be sung this morning with such glory. Tonight we shall be thinking again in a different way about all of that. And I wanted to pick just one or two who've been special to me and came at me. Rupert Brooke in his poetry used the word otherwhence. It's not a word I'd come across before, but I see what it means. It comes at you sort of sideways and unexpected. Just as you need it, you discover something about a particular saint, and you might read a book about them, or one of the books they've written themselves. And then you begin to feel that that saint is helping you in a very special way. I think maybe first and foremost for us at Canterbury, and for me long before that, of St. Benedict, who is generally recognized as the patron saint of Europe and the father of monasticism. He wrote a rule book for communities which really hasn't been bettered by psychologists or clergy or theologians since. It was a book which understood what it meant to be in community and understood the frailty and temptations of human life in community. And what was there first and foremost was a sense of rhythm and making each hour of the day count. And really all our liturgies are based on the patterns of Benedictine rhythm. Not so much the communion service. That sees to itself because the early church left us quite good instructions about how they themselves celebrated the Lord's Supper from the very beginning. I'm talking about daily prayer. And daily prayer is a good way of describing what Benedict left his communities, and Scholastica, his sister, with her women's communities at the time as well. It meant that every part of the day was sanctified. Some of the offices they're called, some of the offices were rather important ones, so everyone was there and concentrated on it, and if they were there, they went into the oratory, shall we call it, the chapel, to do it together. Some were, let's just think about God for a moment and then get on with the work. And those were short offices, which happened in the middle of the day, and then later on, longer ones again, as the day began to call you to restfulness. And so the books that were created actually gave you the scriptures, and particularly the Psalms, which go through every human emotion. If you want rage and anger, you can find it in the psalmist. If you want high praise of God, you can find it in the psalmist. If you want deep tranquility, you can go to Psalm 23 and find the Lord is my shepherd, therefore can I lack nothing, or I shall not want, whatever translation you're using. Somewhere in the Psalms, every nasty feeling that humanity has had and every wonderful feeling that humanity has had is there. And those Psalms are put into sections that we can read. And Benedict was very sure that there were three parts to every human being, bound absolutely inextricably together in a wonderful chemistry which made you. And the three parts were body, mind, and spirit. And he said, every part of your personality in body, mind, and spirit must be exercised each day. Some people will be better doing physical things and liking that much more. Nevertheless, they must exercise study, mental work, and spirituality, prayer, in order that the physical things will develop too. And then you can do it the other way around. Some people are much better studying, and they certainly don't want to be lifting hand tools and all the rest of it. Nevertheless, the body needs exercise, and the mind can be given the best part for those in the community. But they all have to encourage one another to do that, and prayer as well, the spiritual side. If that balance goes wrong, the community goes wrong, but the individual goes wrong too. That seemed to me to be quite wise advice for everyone. And within the monastery, he said there will be those who like waking up early and those who like going to bed late. And I'm actually a sort of person that wakes up very early, and my best thinking is done very early in the morning. And I'm not giving secrets away to say that Fletcher's metabolism works in a completely different way. And I'm not saying you're not up early in the morning sometimes, but you're still awake and texting the whole world and answering questions that have come from the garden congregation at 2 o'clock in the morning, because the world never sleeps as the time goes round. You all know that yourselves, that there are times that you need the encouragement of another. So one of the great words of St. Benedict's theology of community is encouragement. The other one, balance. And that meant that the day rhythmically went through. There is a very ancient, is it a Saxon sundial? It's whatever time of history it comes from, which was dug up from the ground. It's a little gold sundial, and it's had a peg to go in it and would slip in your pocket. And it's about this big. And the peg goes in a particular place. You hold it to the sun, and it's not going to tell you the time. Well, it is, but it's going to tell you the time to say just the 3 brief offices if you're by yourself in the middle of the day when you're far from the monastery, maybe out in the fields or something. And this showed an early form of clock, but it was a clock which was telling you when to pray. It's now a massive museum piece, and Canterbury make copies of it so people can take it away. But I use it as a reminder that every hour of the day is sanctified. But your mind doesn't have to stop your work. Somehow that little thing in your pocket for the monks made them know that the day was holy. Enough of Benedict. Though really there can't be enough of Benedict. But another saint that actually came to my aid when I was in a place where my mother had just died, and I hadn't been very well. It was in 1985, and I picked up a book on the bookstall at Tisbury, my parish church in the countryside. It was there, I think, left over from Lent, and it was called God's Fool. Some of you may have read it. It's written by a French writer, but translated, Julian Green, his name. And God's Fool was a beautiful biography of St. Francis, set out in wonderful chapters and in story form, and you met all the characters of Francis's life and wonderful advice given to the brothers. Now, this is quite different. For St. Benedict's monks had to swear a rule of stabilitas. They were in the same place, within the monastery, and sometimes in Benedictine abbeys, helping the town around them, but essentially stable. Franciscans, on the other hand, were friars who would wander out and be ministering outside. And so Francis during the reading of this book, and I used to take it out into the woods. I had a Welsh Springer Spaniel at the time who loved going walking in the woods, and this character, this dog Ben, would go galloping along the woodland paths, and I would sit on a tree stump and read maybe 3 more. They were very short chapters, and they had good headings telling you about the life of St. Francis, and it all fitted in with the song of the birds and the spring or the autumn leaves as they come now, and it began to be a great help. And as the year began to end, 1985, I thought, well, this has been a sad year, but I think I'm being prompted to go to Assisi. And the minute I said this to somebody else, they said, oh, there are great tours and groups. I said, I don't want any of that, thank you. I just want to go, just me, to Assisi. And nobody needs know that I'm coming or anything of that kind. And so it waited until May, which is about the time of my birthday, and I found myself going on an aeroplane to Rome, and then getting transport through to, well, you don't go, those of you who've been, you don't go up to Assisi in the train, you're left on the plane down below, and then as you come outside, a cab will take you up to Assisi itself. It couldn't have been a better decision for me. It was a perfect week. I wasn't with anyone at all, but would talk to people, as we've done in the bookshop this week, and get to know Assisi a bit. And I decided I would make a plan as to where to go each day, and keep a diary as well. I've kept a journal all through my ministry, and it's a very useful thing to do. I advise anyone to keep a journal, because 2 or 3 sentences, when you look back, will actually conjure up the whole day for you. It's all there, tucked away in your memory, and the minute you fix onto it, you think, oh yes, of course, that was the time I met so-and-so, and then you sit in a chair dreaming for hours about what was going on at that time. But on this occasion, I kept a hardback notebook, which I still have, of this retreat in Assisi. I completely fell in love with Assisi. My village at Tisbury had running through it, a river. It was a chalk stream, and chalk streams tend to wiggle through valleys, and the river was called the River Nada, which is named after the only English snake that has any kind of venom in them. We rarely see them, but the adder wiggles like a snake. So the river was called the Nada. And I sat in Assisi and looked down on the Riva Torto, which means exactly the same. It's a tortuous stream in Italian. And the sunshine would glint down there. And I learned that early in the morning was the time when tourists weren't there. They'd all gone off to comfortable hotels at Orvieto or somewhere else. And then they would stream in at lunchtime. And in the evening, they weren't there either. But in the hot parts of the day, and it wasn't too hot in May in Italy, it was beautiful. The flowers, the spring flowers were just growing. If you climbed up into the woods above Assisi, then little cyclamens and things were flowering. And at the same time, you didn't have to walk far from the center of Assisi and the basilica with all the Giotto paintings and the Cimabue, beautiful paintings, murals on the walls. But there was a spot that I made my own down through a vegetable garden round the other side of San Damiano, looking down across the valley at the Riva Torto, and being able just to think thoughts about how my ministry might go forward at that time, and also about how the Franciscan order had helped in this. And then one day I had my back against the wall. It was a warm wall, and there were lizards around and all sorts of things, blackbirds on the bean sticks that were growing there, and looking down in the valley. Someone came round the corner, and she was a middle-aged lady who pronounced herself to be a Franciscan nun from France. And she said, "Can I sit down with you?" I had mixed feelings about that. But in fact, she did come down, and then we began a conversation, and it was a lovely meeting. We had an hour's conversation about all kinds of things, and one felt, she'd been sent almost like a ministering angel, that she'd come to help me in this. But when she got to go, she stood up, and I said to her, "Shall we keep in touch?" She said, "I'll give you my details, but that's not the important thing. We'll pray for each other. When push comes to shove, prayer is the only thing." And that, rather like the knapsack sentences I keep talking about, hold on to the saint is someone the light shines through. Well, when push comes to shove, prayer is the only thing, was given to me by the Franciscan nun, and I have prayed for her and told the story ever since about how inadvertently somehow, and when you're not really wanting it, you want to be thinking your own thoughts, God sends a messenger to direct those thoughts in a different way. So Francis was then added to my catalogue of saints. Now, since then, I've had churches, and I was going through that with, can't remember which group we were talking about, the saints of the churches I'd had, I think at the dinner that Michael gave the other night. And those saints were manifold. But at the same time, I would come across things which helped me from people who weren't particularly saints, but their words would help when I read them. And I would count in that group very much T.S. Eliot, the poet. The play which he wrote for Canterbury Cathedral, Murder in the Cathedral, was about the assassination of Becket by the Four Knights. And there is a black and white film of him standing there with his three-piece suit with the waistcoat, looking very thin with his fingers. My father used to do this, pushed into the two waistcoat buttons, and talking to Dorothy L. Sayers as they stood looking at what was going on. The play had been commissioned for Canterbury and took place in the chapter house. But during the rehearsals, the producer, and we're talking about 1935, 6, something like that, I would say, the producer cut out 2 lines. Now, I'm a librettist, and if anybody starts tampering with my words, I begin to get sort of... But Eliot obviously accepted this from the producer. And those lines, he said later, "I tucked in my waistcoat pocket." And they became, now I've got here my well-worn copy of the 4 quartets, which I always, always carry with me. And the first quartet, which is called Burnt Norton, and Burnt Norton is a country house in the West Country, which in his day was not occupied, and the garden had been allowed to go to seed a bit. But it starts, and you will know these lines: "Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past." Those lines were cut out from Murder in the Cathedral and started, much later, Eliot's, I think, best work, best spiritual work, those 4 quartets. They're all about particular places. Burnt Norton, the country house, I know Burnt Norton well, and then East Coker, which was a village very near my parish in Sherborne, where Eliot actually is buried. And then after that, a place that we're taught to call, and you will know these rocks, dry salvages. I would have said salvages, the way it was spelt, but he puts it at the bottom. This has to be pronounced in this way, and they're off the coast, I think, more northerly than Connecticut, but not far more northerly. And finally, Little Gidding, which was a religious community at the time when the English Civil War was about to break out, and Nicholas Ferrer formed this place where a lay community came and lived a life of ordinary prayer taken from the Church of England Book of Common Prayer, and they said certain psalms every time of day and the 2 offices together in chapel. And they had all the village children in for Sunday lunch and all of that kind of thing. But Little Gidding became a sign of holiness But to Puritans, because it looked like a monastery, it was a demonic place, so it was really sort of smashed to pieces at the Civil War. But the king, Charles I, had been there and found that Gidding's nieces, Nicholas Ferrer's nieces, made harmonies of the Gospels, which they would stitch together and beautifully bind, and it meant that they cut bits out of each of the Gospels and made a unity of the 4 Gospels. It's not something I agree with doing, because I like the individuality of all the Gospels, but it was a lovely gift to give to the king. And the sense of Little Gidding being a place of such prayer, when push comes to shove, prayer is the only thing, and the undergirding of the situation. I've said this again and again this week. It's our solemn duty daily to be undergirding the situation in the Holy Land at the moment with prayer, because the task for political leaders is obviously going to be a massive one to re-establish any kind of peace there without the conflagration growing bigger and bigger. But Eliot saw this place as a place of great holiness. Another person who saw it as a place of great holiness was your former primate, Frank Griswold, who came and did a wonderful retreat on Little Gidding in Canterbury. Right at the end of the poem Little Gidding, here we are, I can go to the end here. This book falls open at all the best places. He writes this of Little Gidding. Sorry, I'm going to give you the second one first if I do this. Let's go the other way around and give you the right one first. Here we are. If you came this way, taking any route, starting from anywhere, at any time, or at any season, it would always be the same. You would have to put off sense and notion. You are not here to verify, instruct yourself, or inform curiosity, or carry report. You are here to kneel where prayer has been valid. And prayer is more than an order of words, the conscious occupation of the praying mind, or the sound of the voice praying. And what the dead had no speech for when living, they can tell you being dead. For the communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. Here, the intersection of the timeless moment in Greenwich and nowhere, never and always. Well, of course it doesn't say in Greenwich, but it should here. It says in England and nowhere, but you read it in that way, in a good way. And the poem ends, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." That's an amazing thing. You only learn the meaning of your beginnings by having gone right through to the end and finding yourself again and recognizing it for the first time. Eliot actually needs to be read over and over and over again, because he speaks to you in different ways over and over again. But he's actually speaking of so many saints, so many voices, so many situations, and I think that his particular 4 quartets, the summa of his own thinking. At the same time, we were talking earlier, and I mustn't go on much longer because it's midday, we were talking of the light shining through glass. We had an immense amount of glass in Canterbury. Some of it was right back from the 11th century. It had even survived the fire of 1174. And there were many saints in the windows. There were also ordinary people in the windows. And what we learned about the glass when we brought it to the Getty Museum, some of it was being restored, and we brought old glass. But when I was giving a lecture on this in the Getty, they had a pattern on the wall behind me of colour which had come onto the stone floor of Canterbury Cathedral when the sun was shining on it. So there were beautiful mosaics, no more than colours all over the place there. And what we learned from the glaziers was that this was modern glass, because the older the glass is, although you don't see it and your human eye sees the light coming through, there is enough that has grown up inside the glass to prevent a clear reflection to the modern eye on the floor. Whereas the modern glass, not nearly as attractive as you look up at the medieval glass, but at the same time the modern glass gave you a clear pattern of colours on the floor. There's a lesson in that somewhere, that we need both for different kinds of experiences in our life. But I was going to say that, and then I'll end here, it's our best experience with friends when they come to see us in Kent, to take them to Tudley. And Tudley is a little parish church which was not of any particular note until the daughter of the lord of the manor, it was a family called Davigdor Goldsmith, and the daughter was killed in a sailing accident, and the family, the father and mother, wanted a memorial, so they approached Chagall to do an east window, and Chagall agreed, and the east window was created. And he didn't come there until the time that it was to be unveiled. And he came into the church with Lady Davigdor Goldsmith and stood and looked at this beautiful east window. And he said, "I must do it all." And she said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I must do every window in this church." And the windows it's a small church, and so the windows are quite low, so you eyeball what's going on. But I think Sir Henry, the husband, said, "I don't think we can afford that." And he said, "There's no charge. This will be a holy vocation for me. I want people to realize creation and the love of God as they see the glass and the sun changing all the time." He himself was of the Jewish faith. He was brought up in that. He was an exile from his own country in Russia. But at the same time, he did one crucifixion after another, and Christ was always placed in the middle of painful and catastrophic scenes of slaughtering of folk in concentration camps, or at the same time, just extending his arms over a wonderful landscape where little creatures needing care and butterflies, all sorts of things are there. Every time you go to Tudley, and the church is always open, you can walk in and find something else in the glass. And every time we take people there, they are able to point out things that they're seeing, which we haven't discovered yet, but we would. I think that kind of artistic creativity is exceptional. But every one of us has with us a particular gift to share. And the particular gift we've just had shared is that it's actually 12 o'clock. And so I must stop. I could take maybe 2 questions if there's anything you would like to say about joy, but I think Sunday lunch is probably beckoning. Okay. Yeah, there's another one somewhere. Sitting on my lap, there you are.
Would anyone like to ask a question? Yes, Edward.
Oh, Reverend, you mentioned the salvages. I believe those are the rocks off of the north coast of Massachusetts where
Exactly so.
the Eliot family came and settled in 1630 with the Winthrop fleet, which was the foundation of Boston and Salem. So that's why that was important to him.
Thank you
The Puritan
very much indeed.
foundation of
Thank
the
you.
family.
We must find that, Fletcher, so that we can go there.
Questions?
Anything else? One over here.
Thank you, Reverend. How do you define joy?
How do I define joy? I don't define it as being instantly merry and happy and bright. It's something much deeper than that. It's a sense that when, let me use the word, push comes to shove again, all is well, and that things are being accomplished and shared, and that you're feeling at peace with yourself and with God, and therefore can convey something of, shall we say, not easy optimism, but a sense of purpose and pleasure when you're relating to folk. It comes, there's a quote at the beginning of one of Elgar's works, "Rarely, rarely cometh thou, spirit of delight." And I would say joy doesn't come rarely, and sometimes it comes otherwhence, but at other times you think, I need actually to go and do some of this or some of that, some creative activity, because I know that settles me and makes me a better person to be with for a while. So I think that's where I go.
What a beautiful note to end on. Could you just close us with that wonderful prayer you recited yesterday?
Oh, yesterday, yeah, of course.
That'd
Yeah.
be great.
This was when I was lauding the spirit of simplicity in all that we do. So I was reminded of a prayer that was used constantly by a lovely Indian priest who used to chair the General Synod, and nothing is more complicated than a synodical agenda in national terms. He would say, let us pray. Lord, temper with tranquility our manifold activity, that we may do our work for thee with very great simplicity. Amen.
Robert, thank you. What a grace it has been to have you with us. For those who can join us, we'll see you tonight at the 5 o'clock Durflay Requiem, where Robert will be preaching before he heads on. God bless you. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.